we now have the October 7th and the current crisis. There was, like you said earlier, I think it was Asaad who mentioned this was a huge big event, a big acceleration of whatever the conflict has been in the past, and a significant event even historically. So maybe if a brief, Asaad, what happened on the 7th and what's happened since, before we can move on to the some of the other questions. Yeah.
So, well, just October 7th is really like a horrific event, in the history of Israel, and traumatic. But it started, like, let's say, before the October 7th. We have to understand that Hamas, as a government, as a terrorist group, is controlling Gaza with 2 million population, and basically saying that they want to eliminate Israel. They're very frank about it. But for the conservative parties in Israel, the government in Israel, that was a better situation. They didn't want to negotiate any peace deal that will end up with a state of Palestine being established. So, as one of the Israeli ministers quoted, saying that for us as an Israeli government, the Palestinian Authority is a burden, because if they're good, that means that we have to negotiate with them and give them a state. And for us, Hamas is an asset. That's basically was the policy of Israel for the last, let's say, 8 years. So Netanyahu's government was, didn't have any negotiations with the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank. They basically neglected them. Which eventually make them more weak. And on the other hand, they helped Hamas control Gaza. And this happened through even transfer of cash money coming in from Qatar to the Hamas. And Hamas, look, it's a terrorist group, according also to the internationally and the US government, and therefore no banks can allow any money transferred to Hamas. So the money is transferred physically in cash, coming in through Qatar to Israel. Israeli military jeeps will take this money convoys to Gaza, and they will, bring the money in along with a Qatari representative every year, every month, $30 million. That's been there for a while, and Hamas basically even maneuvered Israel. Like they said, yeah, we don't want to have a war now. They had some military operations for some time, and Israel conception was, that Hamas is not interested in trouble now, because they had a fight with the jihadists, which is like a smaller terrorist group inside Gaza, and Hamas didn't intervene. So the Israeli military and intelligence basically thought, for some reason, that the Hamas is not interested in any trouble now. So let's have our focus on the West Bank, on Hezbollah in the north, on Iran, the bigger things. And Hamas was like a small issue. And suddenly, I don't know, like this issue will be probably, investigated in a government committee and understand what happened. There was like a big intelligence failure and defense failure on October 7th. Because people were kidnapped, were killed, and the towns around the Gaza Strip, which is like a few kilometers from there, thousands of Hamas militias entered these areas easily without any resistance, and it was really like it was a shock. Like for us, that day, getting these messages and saying, watching videos of Israeli civilians and kids and mothers being kidnapped and taken on trucks and cars into Gaza, that was a disaster. Now Hamas, for them, they celebrated that because it's the first time that actually they can show like we have some wins against this strongest army in the Middle East. But they realize and they know that the Israeli reaction will be very, very harsh out of this. 1,400 Israelis were killed on October 7th, just on one day. That never happened in the history of Israel. All of the wars of Israel, the Yom Kippur War, the 6 Day War, we didn't have these casualties. And not from civilians. Like we had, army casualties in the Yom Kippur, I think like 2,000, which was like I think a few weeks of a war, and this has happened in one day, and that's how big this trauma is for the Israeli public.